So today I'm going to talk about alien invaders. The word alien's a bit off, but I'll get into that. So next slide. You're all probably just kind of getting through your lunch food coma, and you've heard a lot of talks today, but this is important. Pay attention to me. I have a toddler, so I feel like I get that a lot. Invasive species are the second biggest threat to biodiversity outside of habitat loss. So what I'm going to talk about today is, in my opinion, pretty important. I like biodiversity, so I think this is a pretty important topic that's really just growing in Alberta as people are getting more and more aware of it. So what are invasive species and what are alien species? This is an alien species. It could show up in Alberta, but doesn't have the habitat. It won't survive our winters and it won't last long. But if you click, add in some food and click, and it likes it, then you're going to end up with what could become an invasive species as it spreads and reproduces and takes over. These are a bigger problem than alien species. I've seen geckos show up in lettuce at grocery stores, and those aren't a big deal to us because they won't survive the winter. So part of the impacts of invasive species is that they, as I said, ruin biodiversity. They impact recreational opportunities and can really impact economics. And I'll get into a bit of details about each of those when I profile some species later. So where do they come from? The primary introduction is through our increased transportation system that we have in the world. This is an image showing all the airline flights, boat traffic, and roads. So things are moving around this world like never before. It's just gonna happen. So once they're in our country, how do they spread within the country? So there's a number of different ways. I'll start with escape or intentional release. This is Eugene Schieffelin. You probably don't know him. He's basically, he is to Shakespeare what teenage girls are to Justin Bieber, basically. So he decided that back in the late 1800s that it would be a really good idea to introduce all the birds that are in Shakespeare's plays to Central Park. So he introduced the starling, even though it was in one line of one of Shakespeare's plays, and now we have 200 million starlings across North America. So that was an intentional release. Other intentional releases would be dumping aquariums or escape from game farms or wild boar farms. There's also cultural releases, so weddings where they release doves or butterflies. In some religious groups there is the act where they release fish when someone dies. There's also what we call hitchhiking. So hitchhiking would be when you're unaware that you're transporting it around. So you've got the zebra mussel on a propeller, maybe you just think it's gunk on your propeller and you're moving it from lake to lake. The felt soles on waders can transfer plant propagules between water bodies, plants stuck to boat trailers, those sorts of things. You don't really realize you're doing it, and I'm assuming you're not doing it intentionally, but it can transfer species. And there's horticultural and pet trades, so online sales are really difficult as there's not the same regulations as you can buy plants from Ontario that may be considered invasive here, but they're selling them there and they get shipped to your door. And then at PetSend, that's an online fish website that's selling pets that delivered to your door. And then there's also natural events. So this is a Calgary flood. So hippos aren't invasive species, but who knows, right? So that flood washed out a lot of basements, and people often have aquariums in their basements, and those aquariums could release the fish and spread a species that way. Yeah, it's possible. So what species are we talking about? In the upper left, this is just a very small subset of the species, that's for sure. The upper left is Eurasian water milfoil. That's kind of one of our targets for our Clean Drain Dry Your Boat program. It spreads very easily, even just fragments will grow into new plants and will take over lakes, making bays just clogged with plants. The upper middle one is Asian carp. I don't know if you've heard about the redneck fishing derbies in the States where the goal isn't the biggest fish, but who gets the best injury. Those can grow up to be almost 100 pounds, which is like getting hit with a 12-year-old. The upper right is goldfish. These are becoming more and more of a problem. I'll get into those in a bit more detail. The bottom left is flowering rush. Lucky you, we have that in the Sturgeon watershed. I'll talk about that in more detail. Prussian carp is the middle. That one is in Alberta, quite spreading very rapidly around Alberta. Was introduced likely intentionally as a potential food source or fishing opportunity. I'll get into that in a bit more detail. And then the bottom right is the zebra and quagga mussels, which really affect your grocery shopping experience. I'll get into that. So the three with the squares are ones that are probably of most concern to this group. Ones that we have and ones that are on their way for sure. So I'll kind of profile each one a bit. So this is the flowering rush. It's very pretty. It started in Alberta. The first record in Alberta was in a greenhouse that is not too far from here. In 1985, it was sold as an ornamental plant. People have backyard ponds or they want to decorate their lake lots. It is an aquatic plant. But it is very pretty and spreads quite quickly. The first record in Alberta was actually found in the Sturgeon River. So it's a vigorous aquatic perennial plant. You see the little spiny little roots on the top picture. Each one of those can grow into a new plant. So if it breaks off, it can spread pretty quickly. On the bottom picture there are those little nuggets, balbettes. Those just float along, and if they land in the right spot, they'll grow a new plant as well. So it's pretty easy to reproduce. The root masses are very buoyant. They have large carbohydrate reserves, so they can survive for a long time without planting and becoming a new plant. And they have preformed roots, so they'll just bob along the river and hit some ground and grow a plant, which is pretty nasty. So the maximum depth reported is 4.5 meters deep. So it can grow anywhere from the shoreline out. Kind of scary when you think about that. And then as the average depths of the lakes around here are 4.1 meters, 4.8 meters, and the Sturgeon River is nowhere near that deep. So it can clog up these waterways pretty easily. The max depths are deeper than that, but this is just average. So there would be some open water, but it can cause some damage for sure. So these are pictures. That is at Lake Isle, where there is a huge problem of flowering rush. They have about 8 kilometers of shoreline of this plant growing. We did some surveys this summer where we marked it out with GPS, and we're going to try and track that over the years and see how quickly it's spreading. But it's just taking over the natural reed growth. And it's an issue because wildlife won't use this. Like there's a population of western grebes out at Lake Isle that is a threatened species. It's been recorded that they don't use this species to make their nests, which is interesting, but that's what they say. It's also growing in open water where there weren't plants before, so this is also Lake Isle, so it's starting to really clog up these open waterways, which becomes an issue for boaters. And that's just more Lake Isle showing how it's just taking over these areas. This one is the Sturgeon River, so it is growing in the flowing water. It's not just lakes. And Lake Isle and Sturgeon River, it's all connected, so it's only a matter of time until it's all spread throughout the whole system, potentially. So that's the map of Lake Isle showing where the flowering rush distribution is. You can see it's mostly down in this southern bay area, but there are a few records right close to the outflow onto the Sturgeon, which is up in the top right corner. So what are our options? There's a number of different methods we can try, including biological control, mechanical control, and chemical control. A lot of the problems are that that any mechanical control can spread the species. With those little bulbets on the roots, it's really easy to knock them loose, and they're hard to capture once they're out there. Bottom barriers is basically laying a big carpet on the ground so nothing grows. That might help to control the population, but it also controls everything else that's natural, and it's really expensive. And then there's also cutting and raking. So we are doing some trials with this mechanical stuff on different systems. There's a population near red deer that, oh, actually the red deer population we're using chemical. There's a population that we're cutting down right to the water level, and hopefully after years of cutting, that will exhaust the root system. That's what we're planning. It's not a short-term solution. It's one that's going to take a few years for sure. The chemical option is diquat, which is what we're testing near red deer. Same sort of idea. This chemical doesn't take the chemical to the roots, unfortunately, but it kills everything that it touches. So once you spray a plant, the top of the plant will die, but the roots will stay alive. But we're hoping to exhaust the system over 3 or 4 years of killing the tops. There's other chemicals available, but they're not approved for use in Canada, so we're a bit limited there. We have a population of flowering rush that's growing in Chestermere Lake down by Calgary, and it's even a bigger issue as that lake water is used for all the irrigation systems down south. And so chemicals aren't an option at all, but they really want to get rid of it for obvious reasons. That source population is actually the Calgary Zoo, just for interest's sake. This is Prussian carp. It is fun. It's a very, very rapidly reproducing species. So it's omnivorous, it's tolerant to very low oxygen levels. It basically can live in anything that's wet, no matter how dirty it is or as long as it's wet, it's good. It does gynogenesis, which I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a bit freaky. They can fertilize their eggs with any species. It doesn't need to be a male and a female Prussian carp. So basically, if there's one female Prussian carp, you can get a whole population of Prussian carp. And females can spawn 3 times in a season. That's a lot. That's a lot. They mature as early as 1 to 2 years of age. So there's some of our fishery bios down near Red Deer where these guys are prevalent, have caught these fish, taken them out, left them in the sun for 24 hours, came back the next day and threw it in, and it swam away. So they're hardy buggers. They're beasts. So this is a map showing where they are. It's kind of small. Red Deer's in the middle. And at the very top is Leduc. So they're not quite here yet, although if you hit the click, we just recently found them in the White Mud Creek Ravine. So yeah, they're getting around. We're not quite sure how they're moving, other than probably some intentional release as a potential food source and fishing opportunity. So our options for these guys is difficult, as they're spreading so quickly. So we could net them, electrofish them, rotenone them, which is a chemical that kills all fish, or draw down the water. So if we draw down the water, we could just concentrate them into an area and get better success at removing them. So goldfish is becoming a new issue as well. That's a goldfish. So the issue with goldfish is that people are releasing them as they think it's the humane thing to do. And it's not just this random Facebook girl who thought she was doing a good deed by setting them free. It's parents of kids with 6-year-olds that don't want to kill their fish and they want them to go free and be safe. I mean, I don't blame them. It's going to be heart-wrenching if you have to do that, but it's becoming a pretty big issue. Goldfish they bring disease to ecosystems, they compete for natural resources, and when they feed, they stir up the dirt and cause a whole bunch of cloudy water, which isn't good for any of the species. So we end up with waterways that look like this. And now this is a pretty common occurrence at a lot of stormwater management ponds in the cities. I know one where I used to live looked almost like that, just the fish were a bit smaller. But they're pretty, once they're in a system, they're pretty hard to contain. I'm willing to bet that there are goldfish in the North Saskatchewan watershed region. So zebra and quagga mussels are the poster species that started the aquatic invasive species program in Alberta. We don't have them yet. I should put that out there first. Yet being a good word. So they can live out of the water for 30 days. These originated in Europe and came over on big ships in the ballast water and then ended up in the Great Lakes and have been spreading ever since. So they can live out of the water for 30 days, which when you transfer on a boat means you can pretty much drive anywhere in North America and they'll still be alive when you get there. They're filter feeders, so they take out the good algae in the water and spit out the bad algae. There are a few control options, but they're not very good. One of them is called, well, I'll get into that actually, I've got a slide on that later. They also have a free-floating microscopic form called veligers, which is impossible to see. So if you're driving around in your boat and you take it out but you have some wet items, you may be transferring veligers that you can't see. So the basic rule is any attached mussel is an invasive mussel in Alberta. You'll get marine mussels that attach, and don't panic if you go to BC and you see things that are attached, but any attached mussel in Alberta. So if you're taking out your dock in this right now and you have something growing on your dock, you probably want to call us and let us know because that could be a problem. So one of the major impacts and why we're getting a lot of support for this program is that the economic impact of zebra mussels would be massive in Alberta. We did a quick little economic assessment and found that it was about 75 million a year if we get it. So imagine down south with the irrigation districts with all their pipes in the water, if they got zebra mussels clogging up those pipes, it would be the end of a lot of people's livelihood, really. So there's been a lot of political support for this program, and it's really helped to kick off an awareness. Ecologically, these species can really alter habitats. There's the little happy before and after fish picture where there's plants and habitat before, and then afterwards just some barren rocks covered in mussels. So the threat is real. These are all the boats that we've caught come through our inspection stations between 2013 and 2015. And this was updated in July, and I think there's been a couple more since then. But you can see those are the destinations that they're going. So some pretty good lakes: Sylvan Lake, Pigeon Lake, Gull Lake, Wabamun Lake, and the list goes on. Some of them are moving on to BC and Northwest Territories, but these are boats that are containing mussels, and we've only started looking since 2013. So the threat is pretty real there. So control options, yeah, not much. So there are two that have been used. There's a product called Zequinox, which has only been tested on gravel pit ponds in the States. And it's proved effective in those little contained systems in the States. I don't believe we have approval to use Zequinox in Canada yet. Recently there was a new zebra mussel population found in Lake Winnipeg, and that was in 2013, I think. And they used potash to try and treat the area, but that is a massive lake. And trying to treat an area for a species that moves around in that gelatinous veliger form is pretty difficult. So their potash treatment was ineffective. Doesn't mean that it might not work in certain situations, but in that situation it didn't work. So we're kind of, what do we do? So this is the Alberta Aquatic Invasive Species Program in a nutshell, and it's not a whole division or a fleet of staff. It's only like a few of us, that's for sure, but we're irking our way through it. So in the middle you have kind of the central AIS coordinator, and that's Kate Wilson, and she probably would have given this talk, but she's in Ottawa today. And then each of the areas, so if you click the button, so there's inspection. There's a big part of our program is boat inspections, and that's a focus on the zebra mussels and quagga mussels. This summer alone, we inspected over 19,000 boats, and each of our state, we have 10 different stations, and they're located around the borders of the province, so trying to get the highest risk boats. We have 10 stations, and we also have a couple of roving stations and some provincial parks crews. And then in the bottom left is the monitoring program. This summer we monitored 66 lakes, and in the previous the total number of lakes we've looked for these critters in is 192 in 3 years. So we're getting around. We're partnering with a bunch of organizations like Alberta Lake Watch or Alberta Lake Management Society, and using as many resources as we can to discover. But like I said, if you have a lake or you know someone with a lake, if they take out a dock stand, then look to see if there are mussels growing on it. Click button. So we're also developing response plans. Every different lake is going to have a different response, different priorities. Imagine a lake in Kananaskis Provincial Park versus Sylvan Lake versus a boreal lake. Every lake is going to have a different plan. We recently conducted a catfish eradication at a stocked water body near Fort Mac. This was an invasive species of catfish, and we were basically trialing our response by using rotenone to get rid of all the catfish in that water body. And then policy-wise, we have updated our Alberta Fisheries Act to include 52 species of prohibited invasives, and that includes plants, fish, and invertebrates. Also federally, there are new restrictions under the Federal Fisheries Act that you aren't allowed to import or possess or transport, and that includes zebra quagga mussels and Asian carps. And then the most important part of the program is me, and that's kind of me this morning, I guess, shivering on my couch with my Snuggie on. Yeah, not having a beer. Yeah, that was water. So that the education really, in my opinion, and I'm totally biased, is the most important part of this program, as prevention is key to everything. And people won't do prevention unless they're educated on the issue. So the campaign started with Clean, Drain, Dry Your Boat. We stole the catchy slogan from all the other jurisdictions around North America who are using it. We wanted to keep the message consistent. So we've created boat launch signs, magazine ads, TV commercials. I don't know if you watch the news these days. There's a pretty good campaign running during the news, which is awesome because nobody PVRs the news, so you don't skip the ads. We've also developed swag and goods to hand out to people when they come to the boat inspection stations. That face-to-face interaction at the boat inspection stations is probably our best source of education, as you're getting the target audience right there, right then. And then this year we've released our Don't Let It Loose campaign, which is more focused on the invasives that aren't mussels. And so these are targeted, these two posters are targeted towards pet shops and horticulture groups, and then this one is targeted to the live food markets. This is a very new campaign, so the word is slowly getting out, but come In the next month or so, we'll be sending letters to every pet shop, horticulture group, and live food market in the province to let them know that what they have, if they're selling anything that's on our prohibited species list, it has to be gone by December 31st, 2015, or it's illegal. So they'll be getting the notification right away, and we'll continue promoting this program. And then we also just pumping out material as much as we can. These are little quick fat brochures. We have one on Prussian carp, one on a general one on invasive species and the don't let it loose. We've got clean drain dry ones. So we're just trying to get out the information in any format you want, and if anybody here wants anything, they can contact me and I can hook you up with that sort of thing.